A strike on the Russian occupying forces in Havrylivka Drua in Kherson Oblast on January 5, 2023 was confirmed. At the moment, there is information that up to 100 injured soldiers were taken to local hospitals. The information concerning killed occupiers is being established. The Ukrainian aircraft launched an attack on the area of concentration of the Russian occupiers. The aftermath of the attack is being established. Units of the rocket forces and artillery of the Defense Forces of Ukraine launched attacks on two areas of concentration of manpower and military equipment of Russians. The occupiers launched one missile attack and 12 attacks using multiple launch rocket systems, including on the civil infrastructure of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts. The threat of further Russian aircraft and missile attacks remains all throughout Ukraine. In order to maintain their offensive potential and replenish losses, the occupiers continue to conduct mobilization measures. Russians concentrate their main efforts on the full siege of Donetsk Oblast within its administrative borders. They are conducting offensive action on the Bakhmut front and trying to strengthen their tactical positions on the Kupiansk, Lyman and Avdiivka fronts with no success. They hold the defense on other fronts. On the Siversk and Slobozan fronts, the occupiers launched attacks on areas near the settlements of Mykolaievka in Chernihiv Oblast and Streleka, Krasna, Ambarn, Buravatka, Hadish, Zilin and Odradin in Kharkiv Oblast. On the Kupiansk and Lyman fronts, 19 settlements were attacked by Russians, among them Dvorikna, Kupiansk, Kislivka, Kotlyarivka, Krokmoln in Kharkiv Oblast and Stelmakivka, Makiivka, Ploshchenka and Dybrova in Luhansk Oblast. On the Bakhmut front, over 15 settlements were struck using tanks, mortars, tubed and rocket artillery, including Spern, Berestov, Bilohorivka, Soldar and Bakhmut in Donetsk Oblast. On the Avdiivka front, Russians launched attacks on the settlements of Avdiivka, Vasil, Nevelsk, Krasnohorivka, Hierhivka, Marinka and Novomykhailivka in Donetsk Oblast. On the Novopavlivka front, the settlements of Vremivka, Velika Novosilka, Volodar and Pereskovivka in Donetsk Oblast were struck. On the Zaporizhia front, districts of 16 settlements were attacked, among them Zilin Pol and Novopil in Donetsk Oblast, Huliapol, Zaliznikn, Cheriv, Sherbeki and Stepov in Zaporizhia Oblast and Nikopol in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. On the Kherson front, Russians launched attacks on the civil infrastructure of the settlements of Chornobaivka, Berislav, Zolota Baka and Kherson. There were casualties among civilians. As of January 6, 539 Russian conscripts have been killed in Ukraine, not counting those killed in Makiivka, as volunteers and journalists have discovered. Based on publicly available data, we have managed to establish the names of 500 conscripts who have been killed in the combat zone on the territory of Ukraine since October. Another 39 people have died on the territory of Russia, most often, allegedly, because of heart problems and as a result of accidents or due to alcohol abuse. However, actual losses among the conscripts may be much higher, as many reports about soldiers who have been killed in Ukraine since October do not indicate their status. As conscripts state, their units continue to suffer heavy losses for a number of reasons. These include intensive and precise artillery shelling from Ukraine, poor coordination of actions between different units of the Russian military, problems with communication and maps, as well as insufficient preparation. According to Russian President Vladimir Putin, 300,000 draftees joined the armed forces of Russia during the first wave of mobilization, and 150,000 Russian conscripts allegedly have been sent to Ukraine. In late October, Putin announced that the partial mobilization was over. However, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia continues mobilization covertly, despite official statements about its completion. Ukraine's military launched a devastating strike on New Year's Day, hitting a building housing recently mobilized Russian soldiers in the occupied region of Donetsk. Russia's official response has been surprising. The Ministry of Defense took the unusual step of swiftly announcing the deaths of 63, later revised to 89, soldiers, the largest number of casualties so far acknowledged in any incident since the start of Russia's mass invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. One of Russia's best-known and most respected civil society organizations, the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers of Russia, CSMR, and its network of committees provided a focal point for opposition to Moscow's unpopular wars in Afghanistan and Chechnya, particularly by defending the rights of conscripted soldiers. The CSMR and committees across Russia provided free advice on legal ways to defer or evade conscription, and even took the Ministry of Defense to court to compel the state to fulfill its legal obligations to its own soldiers. Without the backing of the committees of soldiers' mothers, with their valuable networks and experience, the mothers of Russia's soldiers fighting in Ukraine are not able to speak with one voice. Instead, they organize on a much smaller scale, typically around units that their sons serve in, a particular military incident, or the regions where their sons were recruited from. Their messages are therefore fragmented and often inconsistent, although there are some themes. For these mothers, a soldier son who is killed in combat is a double tragedy, the loss of the loved one as well as the loss of the salary that sustains life for others. It is no wonder that some of the mothers of Russia's fallen soldiers call upon the state to provide them with financial compensation. The partial mobilization, announced by Vladimir Putin in September, has added a further layer of complexity, introducing a new category of soldiers' mothers, mothers of men who might unwillingly become soldiers. The Russian state wants the approval of soldiers' mothers and feels the need to respond to their concerns because, especially during wartime, they command a great deal of public respect and moral authority. At the same time, it simply does not trust them to spontaneously articulate the correct views. The Kremlin's solution is to create carefully staged performances that give the appearance of unity, see main photo. A prime example was Putin's televised meeting in November with a group of women who may be soldiers' mothers but who are far from ordinary. All were carefully chosen, some for their connections to national or regional political elites, others for their membership of patriotic organizations that openly support the war. Where does this leave the mothers of Russia's soldiers? Our research is still ongoing, but we do not expect soldiers' mothers to lead mass protests condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We do, however, see more subtle forms of resistance which, over time, are contributing to the erosion of Russian society's support for the war in Ukraine. Russian and Ukrainian forces exchanged artillery fire in Ukraine on Friday, even after Moscow said it had ordered its troops to stop shooting for a unilateral truce that was firmly rejected by Kyiv. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the 36-hour ceasefire from midday on Friday to observe Orthodox Christmas. Kyiv has said it has no intention to stop fighting, rejecting the purported truce as a stunt by Moscow to buy time to reinforce troops that have taken heavy losses this week. Russia's defense ministry said its troops began observing the ceasefire from noon Moscow time, along the entire line of contact, in the conflict, but said Ukraine kept up shelling populated areas and military positions. Reuters journalists heard explosions, which Ukrainian troops described as incoming Russian rocket fire. Ukrainians fired back from tanks. One witness in the Russian-occupied regional capital, Donetsk, close to the front, described outgoing artillery fired from pro-Russian positions on the city's outskirts after the truce was meant to take effect. The Ukrainian governor of the frontline eastern Luhansk province, Serhiy Haidai, said that in the first 3 hours of the purported ceasefire the Russians had shelled Ukrainian positions 14 times and stormed one settlement 3 times. Russia's Orthodox Church observes Christmas on January 7th. The main Orthodox Church in Ukraine has rejected the authority of Moscow, and many Ukrainians have shifted their calendar to celebrate Christmas on December 25, as in the West. Putin attended a service by himself inside a Kremlin cathedral rather than joining other worshippers in a public celebration. State television showed 2 live clips of Putin inside the gilded Cathedral of the Annunciation as Orthodox priests conducted the midnight service, known as the Divine Liturgy. Washington unveiled its latest $3.75 billion U.S. package of military aid for Ukraine and allies affected by the war, for the first time sending Kyiv the U.S. Army's workhorse Bradley fighting vehicles. That caps a week in which both Germany and France also pledged armored vehicles, finally fulfilling one of Kyiv's most urgent requests from its allies, for armor to defeat Russian tanks in mechanized battles. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who pleaded for the Bradleys in Washington last month on his first trip abroad since the war began, said on Friday they were exactly what is needed. The U.S. package also includes Sea Sparrow air defense missiles, and Germany's includes Patriot missiles, which Washington offered last month. Shortly before the ceasefire was meant to start, rockets slammed into a residential building in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk close to the eastern front line, damaging 14 homes, though with no casualties as many people have fled. One rescue worker was killed and 4 others injured after Russian forces shelled a fire department in the southern city of Kherson before the deadline early on Friday, the regional governor said. Reuters could not immediately verify this. Zelensky rejected the ceasefire out of hand as a ploy for Russia to buy time after sustaining crippling losses at the front line. Scores of Russian troops were killed in one attack over the New Year weekend. Laura Cooper, a U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense focusing on Russia and Ukraine, remarked to reporters in Washington on Friday that Putin's statement about a ceasefire needed to be taken with a grain of salt. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, starting a war that has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced millions of Ukrainians. With weapons and financial support from the United States and Europe, Ukraine has driven Russia back from some of its territory, but battles are raging in the east and south. Ukraine's military general staff said its soldiers repelled repeated Russian attacks over the past day, with Moscow focused on trying to take towns in Donetsk. The Ukrainian government has taken the main cathedral of the revered historic monastery from the church previously affiliated with Moscow's Patriarchate and allowed its Ukrainian rival to use it for Orthodox Christmas services. The move comes as the long-running tensions between the two churches exacerbated amid Russia's war in Ukraine. Ukrainian Minister of Culture Alexander Tkachenko said Thursday that the Dormition Cathedral and the refectory church of the nearly 1,000-year-old Pechersk Lavra, also known as Monastery of the Caves, in the Ukrainian capital have been taken over by the state after the lease of them held by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church (UOS) expired on December 31. On Friday, Tkachenko said that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine (OCU), the similarly named rival church, asked for and was granted permission to conduct the service at the cathedral on Saturday when Orthodox Christmas is celebrated. In 2019, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine received recognition from the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. Moscow's and most other Orthodox patriarchs refused to accept that designation that formalized a split with the Russian Church. But Ukrainian security agencies have claimed that it has maintained close ties with Moscow. They have conducted numerous raids of the church's holy sites, posting photos of rubles, Russian passports, and leaflets with messages from the Moscow Patriarch. Prominent Ukrainian Orthodox Church leaders have rejected the allegations of ties with Moscow, insisting that they have loyally supported Ukraine from the start of the war and that a government crackdown will only hand a propaganda coup to Russia. The Security Service of Ukraine, SSU, has identified 3 more Russian invaders who took part in abductions and tortures of civilians in the occupied territories of Zaporizhia Oblast. The service says that one of the perpetrators is the commander of the tactical group of the 22nd Separate Operational Brigade of Rosgvardia, the National Guard of Russia. He was appointed military commandant of the Occupation Administration of Melitopol, after the Ukrainian city was captured. When holding this position, he fulfilled Moscow's task to suppress the resistance movement in Pryazovia, term used to refer to the geographic area of the north coast of the Sea of Azov, edition. He formed punitive detachments that conducted mass raids on the places of residence of local residents in order to do this. During such raids, Russian occupiers abducted people and took them to the military commandant's office of the Russian Federation. There, the information about the location of Ukrainian patriots in the area was beaten out of the victims. 2 more war criminals are officers of the Makhachkala, the capital of the Republic of Dagestan, Russia, Detachment of Special Police, more commonly known as OMON, of the Rosgvardia Department in the Republic of Dagestan. At the beginning of the occupation of Vasilivka District, Zaporizhia Oblast, they became part of the Commandant's Office of the Russian Federation created by the aggressor, one as the deputy head of the occupation body, and the other as his assistant. The SSU investigators notified the offenders of suspicion of violating the laws and customs of war based on the collected evidence. The U.S. will send $3.75 billion in military weapons and other aid to Ukraine and its neighbors on NATO's eastern flank, the White House announced Friday, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine grinds on. The latest tranche of assistance will include for the first time Bradley armored vehicles for Ukraine. The armored carrier is used to transport troops to combat and is known as a tank killer because of the anti-tank missile it can fire. The biggest U.S. assistance package to date for Kyiv includes a $2.85 billion drawdown from the Pentagon stocks that will be sent directly to Ukraine and $225 million in foreign military financing to build the long-term capacity and support modernization of Ukraine's military, according to the White House. It also includes $682 million in foreign military financing for European allies to help backfill donations of military equipment they've made to Ukraine. The direct assistance for Ukraine includes 50 Bradleys as well as 500 anti-tank missiles and 250,000 rounds of ammunition for the carriers. The U.S. is also sending 100 M113 armored personnel carriers, 55 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, or MRAPs, and 138 Humvees, as well as ammunition for high-mobility artillery, rocket systems and air defense systems and other weapons, and thousands of rounds of artillery, according to the Pentagon. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said the Bradleys will be particularly useful to Ukraine in ongoing heavy fighting in largely rural areas of eastern Ukraine. The new U.S. package was detailed by the White House and Pentagon as Germany announced it would supply around 40 Marder armored personnel carriers to Ukraine in this year's first quarter. These 40 vehicles should be ready in the first quarter already so that they can be handed over to Ukraine, Scholz's spokesman, Stefan Hebestreit, told reporters in Berlin. Germany plans to train Ukrainian forces to use the vehicles, and Hebestreit said experts expect that process to take around 8 weeks. Germany has already given significant military aid, including howitzers, Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft guns and an Iris-T surface-to-air missile system, with 3 more of those set to follow this year. Germany last year championed deals in which Eastern NATO allies sent familiar Soviet-era equipment to Ukraine, with Germany in turn supplying those countries with more modern Western-made equipment. Ukraine and a number of German lawmakers inside and outside Scholz's governing coalition also have called for Germany to deliver Leopard 2 battle tanks. Advocates of delivering the Leopard were cheered by the move on Marder APCs and vowed to keep pressing the point. But Hebestreit said that battle tanks weren't an issue in Thursday's call between Scholz and Biden. He said Germany will stick to its principles of supporting Ukraine as strongly as possible, while not going it alone on weapons supplies and ensuring that NATO doesn't become a party to Russia's war in Ukraine. Germany also said Thursday that it will follow the U.S. in supplying a Patriot air defense missile battery to Ukraine. That was at the request of the U.S. and also is expected in the first quarter, Hebestreit said. The number of those who believe that the authorities are ready to make unacceptable compromises with Russia has risen to 7%, compared to 5% in September. Meanwhile, only 15% of Ukrainians believe that the West is tiring of the war and wants Ukraine to negotiate with Russia. This number hasn't changed since September. Those who believe that the West continues to support Ukraine and expect the end of the war on terms acceptable to Ukraine have increased from 73% to 76%. The survey was conducted from December 4 to December 27. 2,005 people were interviewed by phone in all regions of Ukraine, with the exception of the occupied territories of Donbass and Crimea. Those who went abroad after February 24 were also not interviewed. The statistical error does not exceed 2.4%. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky presented a 10-point peace formula at the G20 summit, which includes the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, the withdrawal of Russian troops, the release of all prisoners, a tribunal for those guilty of aggression, and security guarantees for Ukraine. On the same day, Russia carried out another massive missile attack on Ukrainian cities in almost all regions. The enemy is continuing its missile and drone strike terror campaign in Ukraine. Russia has been waging a full-scale war against Ukraine for more than 10 months, since February 24, targeting residential buildings, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure. On October 4, President Zelensky approved a decision of the National Security and Defense Council on the impossibility of negotiations with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. The president's office said that Kyiv will go to negotiations when the president changes in Russia. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that Ukraine's success in possible negotiations with Russia will depend on Kyiv's strength on the battlefield. Later, Zelensky said that Ukraine will be able to find a format for dialogue with Russia if the Russians withdraw from the occupied Ukrainian territories and admit that they have made a terrible mistake. The White House on January 6 announced new sanctions on Iran's aviation and defense sector for supplying the drones Russia uses to bomb Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. The sanctions will affect 6 executives and board members of Iran's top defense contractor, Quds Aviation Industries, as well as the director of Iran's aerospace industries organization overseeing its ballistic missile program, according to the U.S. Treasury Department. Iran is fueling Russia's war in Ukraine with its provision of UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, technology. Today, the United States sanctioned 7 people involved in Iran's UAV and ballistic missile programs Moscow is using to target Ukraine's critical infrastructure. Iran has been a key source of kamikaze drones that Russia has launched at Ukraine by the hundreds. The Joe Biden administration has scrambled to try to block Tehran from supplying the drones, many of which use Western-made parts. However, it's difficult to control these parts, many of which are widely available and have civilian applications. Ukraine has shot down more than 500 drones launched by Russia since September, according to the Air Force of Ukraine's armed forces. The transport holding, which is one of the largest logistics centers in Ukraine, is suspected of tax evasion in the amount of more than $18.3,494,000. Following authorized searches of the administrative buildings of the company, the ESBU detectives said they had found and seized documents about financial and economic activities that are evidence of the offense. Reportedly, Russian citizens, by prior conspiracy with the company's officials, since 2021, overstated the value-added tax credit during financial and economic transactions with several business entities. Such violations of the requirements of the tax code of Ukraine led to the non-receipt of more than $18.3,494,000 to the state budget. The agency noted that as part of the pre-trial investigation, the corporate rights of the company were seized. And also by prohibiting the alienation, disposal and use of registered property, 9 vehicles and 13 real estate objects, buildings, land plots, etc. The estimated total value of the seized inventory stands at about $700 million, $18.9 million. According to the industry outlet Ports of Ukraine, the business in question is Odessa-based Euroterminal LLC, the sanction against which was issued by the Shevchenkivsky District Court of Kiev.